afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for this really important presentation about our PFAS health study. I'm supposed to stand right here so that we're projecting this on Zoom as well. Looks like some people are joining us on Zoom. And we're also recording tonight thanks to APAC. We have James here helping us record tonight. So this will be available live as a recording through APAC. And they're available through Facebook, James?
Facebook, YouTube.
Yeah, we'll share that with you. So this is a super important meeting tonight, and the information we're sharing is preliminary. It's the early stages of understanding the results of the PFAS health study. So we're very grateful for all of you being here. There's so much going on with PFAS, and the research is constantly changing. Even just today, I was reading about a new technology that they think will help to break PFAS down, and you'll hear all about that. So tonight, as you may know, we have Dr. Laurel Shader, who is an amazing expert from Silent Spring Institute, and she's just coming back hot off the press from being in Michigan for several days at another PFAS conference, knowing her, probably presenting some major things and learning all kinds of new things. We also have Emily Heckel, who is leading the study here in AIR, and we're fortunate to have representation from our legislation here as well. And we'll say a few words in just a moment. I wanted to mention a few things about PACE before we launch our presentation today. As I hope you know, PACE stands for People of AIR Concerned About the Environment. And PACE has been actively involved in environmental issues, not just in AIR, but locally here since 1997. And that's when Julie Cornswick, who just came in, Julie went away. Wave your hand, Julie. Julie Cornswick and I have been involved since the very beginning, and so it's been 27 years since we've been working with PACE and all sorts of issues. Our first job was to take on what was going on at Fort Devens, which had become Devens at that point, and there were a number of landfill arsenic issues. There was PCE from dry cleaning. The parachutes had caused a pretty large plume. And there's still some ongoing projects that we are following, and PFAS is one of those projects. As you may know, some of the PFAS got into our drinking water because it got into the groundwater from firefighting foam, and also where they used to practice putting out fires at Martin Field. So that's some kind of contamination. So we got involved in things at the Army, and we won some important battles. We also took on the railroad at one point. It used to be Guilford Railroad, now it's Pan Am, but they took over a very large section of the town's aquifer, and we fought that, tried to get the railroad to not build an auto unloading facility on top of the Spec Pond aquifer, but our right to protect our water did not win over the rights of the railroad to have interstate commerce. So as you may know, we lost that battle. We also took on a problem with small family-owned video store business who have unfortunately occupied a previously contaminated site with dry cleaning solvent. It was a former dry cleaning building, and the family that rented that space became very ill because it had been exposed to high levels of dry cleaning solvent. And so now we're with PFAS. That's our main focus, and we've been working on that for some time. And we're very fortunate to have connected with Laurel Shader at the beginning of this. And I do have a formal announcement that I'm launching for the first time tonight, which is I am going to retire. I'm going to retire at the end of this year on December 6th. And we need people to step forward and help us out with continuing PACE. And we hope that you or somebody you know will consider stepping in. And Julie, I think, is going to retire as well, yes?
I would like to. My intention is that if there looks like there's anybody willing to step in, I will stick around and ease the transition as much as I can. If nobody steps up, then I think PACE is going to have to be shut down cleanly, which is kind of a big job of its own, and I will volunteer to take care of that.
PACE is in a really
somebody
good.
does step up.
PACE is in a really good spot right now. We have $62,000 grant that needs to be spent. We need some people to come along and take that by the reins and power through that. There's some really exciting things going on. The water Tussa pool, we've got grants for that. So there's a lot of really wonderful things going on, and we do intend to support new people to take the reins. Okay, so with that, I would like to welcome our representative for Lori Trahan, who, as you know, is our Congresswoman, Jake, I'm hoping I pronounced your name right, Malstrandery? Close?
Pretty good.
It's a hard name to pronounce. He's joining us from Lowell, and he's been working with Lori Trahan for a couple of years, 2.5 years. And he is Lori Trahan's outreach director, and he's here to give us share a few words about the legislative process at the federal level. So Jake, if you'd like to come up here, help give a round of applause.
Yes, so Jake Mastrandria, really valiant effort on the last name there. It trips up everybody, so I appreciate that. I'm really happy to be here tonight representing Congresswoman Trahan and the work that we've been doing at the federal level. I know Rep. Sina should be joining us later to discuss the work at the state level, because it really is hand in hand from the legislative side here. But the main things I want to talk about tonight is the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so for people who don't know, this was one of the core pillars of President Biden's Investing in America agenda. That makes up the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which are delivering transformative changes to the entire country. But specifically, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law has a focus directly related to the work that PACE is doing and the work that communities like Ayer across the country are doing to clean up their communities and make sure people are safe. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law included $1.1 billion in federal funding that's coming to the state of Massachusetts to boost up their state revolving loan fund program. And for people who aren't aware, the state revolving loan fund program is a competitive application process for cities and towns to apply to get water infrastructure projects done. And you get a low interest loan that can be paid back over 20 to 30 years, which really gives these communities the flexibility they need to be able to execute these projects and not be waiting around for taxpayer dollars to add up and execute them. So what this supplemental funding means is that the Mass DEP is able to, and the Clean Water Trust are able to award loans to more projects in more communities throughout Massachusetts. And beyond that, they're able to specifically target projects that are related to PFAS by providing significant levels of loan forgiveness. So these loan offers that would need to be paid back over 20 to 30 years can get percentages that are just forgiven and turned into grants to directly benefit taxpayers and remove that burden from taxpayers in communities that are trying to address these problems. Now, when you talk about Ayer, the Congresswoman is well aware of the tremendous work that PACE and the town of Ayer have been doing on PFAS from the start. And when the Congresswoman was working on preliminary PFAS legislation in the House back in 2021, she got on the House floor and she talked specifically about Littleton and Ayer and the work that these communities were doing to get ahead of the curve and to address PFAS contamination with upgraded treatment plants in these towns. And that's the kind of leadership we need at the local level to address these problems and correct them. So what the bipartisan infrastructure law funding is going to translate to is more communities following in Ayer's footsteps, getting the technology that they need at their treatment plants to be able to clean up the PFAS contamination and keep up with the new heightened EPA standards to ensure that there's no PFAS or very, very undetectable levels of PFAS in our drinking water and in our sewer water. So that's what's going on at the federal level, and this funding is now at the state to be able to dole it out over the next several years. And in addition to the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, the $1.1 billion, I'm going to say that again because it's a big number that bears repeating. $200 million of ARPA funding, American Rescue Plan Act funding, went to the Clean Water Trust to be able to specifically provide grants to PFAS projects. So this is something that at the earliest levels, it's local awareness of an issue with groups like PACE, raising awareness, getting people like you to come out and express interest in keeping your community safe. It's going up to the state, and the state of Massachusetts acknowledging that these projects need to get done to keep people safe. And then it goes up to the federal government, and that's where the funding comes from and trickles down to the local level. So that's kind of a little overview of the process. I'm happy if anybody has a question, I can do my best to answer it, but I wanted to kind of come here and talk about the work that the Congresswoman's doing with the Biden administration. So yeah.
What percentage of our PFAS filtration plants was provided by the federal government? Was any?
So
You'll have to repeat the question.
A gentleman in the back row asked what percentage of PFAS of federal funding contributed to the PFAS plant in Ayer. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but what I can say is that the town, in addition to this funding that flowed to the state, the American Rescue Plan Act provided direct funding to communities. And I'm going to have everyone pause with me for 1 second while I pull this up. The town of Ayer received $2.4 million in ARPA funding, and they were able to use $700,000 of those ARPA dollars to support the Spectacle Pond treatment plant transmission line. And so this was an issue that happened after the transmission plant was already, the treatment plant was built. There was an issue with the transmission line that was sending the water back and forth between the community and the plant, and they were able to use $700,000 in federal ARPA money to fix that problem.
Thank you.
Yep.
What's being done at the federal level to hold companies accountable for creating this PFAS and continuing to create PFAS?
So we had a question about the what the federal government is doing to hold companies accountable and to, I guess, in a sense, prevent PFAS pollution at the source.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shifting mindset in the approach to addressing PFAS contamination at this point, because there's so many, the funding so far is addressing detectable PFAS issues in communities, in spaces like Fort Devens, in spaces with former laundromats, former chemical companies. And what's been great about Massachusetts in particular is that Mass DEP and through legal action is actually able to hold these responsible parties accountable. And in communities like Westminster, that's also in the 3rd district, the company responsible for the PFAS contamination in Westminster is being held accountable and is paying for the full treatment system in that community. In terms of active legislation, I wouldn't be able to speak to that right now.
So Lori Johann pursuing anything in that? You don't know, I'm assuming.
No, so the two pieces of legislation that the Congresswoman has most recently pursued with PFAS specifically was, and I'll pull this up as well. So she was able to introduce the PFAS Action Act, which was a plan to provide direct funding to communities to address contamination of PFAS, and it was able to pass through the House, but it was stalled in the Senate back in 2021. Luckily, the bipartisan infrastructure law included the funding that I've spoken about to address that. And in preventative measures, so back in 2022, she was able to support the passing in the House of the Protecting Firefighters from Adverse Substances, or the PFAS Act, which was directly targeting the prevention of PFAS pollution at fire departments by ensuring that fire departments would have the necessary equipment to keep their firefighters safe and to dispose of chemicals in a proper way. And so those are the most recent pieces of legislation that the Congresswoman specifically focused on with PFAS. Yep.
Did that last piece of legislation get through the Senate?
I don't believe so, no. Yep.
That funding, is that completely separate from any elections that we have this November? Or is that money stable?
Yeah, so that funding
No
is,
way they can,
yes, that funding has been delivered to the state of Massachusetts to be able to be dispersed through the state revolving fund program. That funding does run out in 2026 because that's when the bipartisan infrastructure laws funding runs out. So we're hoping for positive results in November to be able to pursue the bipartisan infrastructure law 2.0 or some form of that. Because if you look at the impact of this legislation on the entire country and in the Congresswoman's district, it's really transformative. I mean, there's the PFAS portion that I talked about tonight, but there's such an emphasis on rebuilding roads and bridges and interstate highways and commuter rail stations and passenger stations, transit stations. So electrifying vehicle fleets, this funding is so flexible and addresses so many necessary infrastructure areas that it's just been tremendous, and we hope to continue to keep those funds flowing to the state of Massachusetts. All right, I appreciate the time tonight, and thank you all for coming.
I'll just add a couple of things at the state level. Representative Sina may make it. You might have gotten lost in the little girls having their performance tonight. There is a big push to also state level regulations, and we're calling it "turn the faucet off," meaning let's stop making this stuff, because we still are making it and using it in so many places. It's kind of ridiculous. So that's what we need to do. And I do have a flyer. I'm working with Clean Water Action on that with some various committees. And we're asking for regulations to be passed to remove PFAS from many products where it's added because it's a convenience feature. It's in a lot of cosmetics. It's in dental floss. It's in just so many things that it's not necessary. There are some medical things that it really is a helpful product, but we don't need it in so many other things. And I'm off screen again, sorry about that. All right, so, yes?
Is it really in toilet paper?
I cannot hear you.
Is it in toilet paper?
The question was, is it in toilet paper? I'm gonna let Laurel Shader answer that sort of question, because it's in a lot of, yeah, I think it is in a lot of things like that. It's also in menstrual products, so a lot of menstrual products. So with that, I would like to welcome Laurel Shader to this stage, to our screen here. Please join me in giving her a round of applause.
Great. How's everyone doing tonight?
Oh, let me get my water bottle off screen. Sorry about that. That was embarrassing.
All right, well, it's really a privilege to be here tonight. Thank you for coming to learn about PFAS and to hear some updates about our study. It was a little over 5 years ago that I first met Lori for the first time at a PFAS event that PACE hosted, standing right here, talking about what we knew at that time. It was around the time that this calls for proposal for this study came out, and Lori,
Can you speak up a little bit more? People in the back are having trouble hearing.
Oh. Okay.
I don't think a microphone's on.
That needs to be on. I don't know.
The microphone might not be on, Laurel.
Yeah.
I think that speaker may have powered down while we were waiting this up.
I don't think there's an on button on this.
Was this on?
I will talk loud.
It was on before, I don't think it's on now, I think it's powered down automatically as we were waiting to start.
Should I unplug it?
Redo the power button.
For people at home, we're working out the speaker here in the room. Well, while that's happening, I'll talk louder.
And just to remind everyone, we do have some refreshments here, so please come help yourself. We've got fruit salad, desserts, and tea, coffee, and drinks, so help yourself.
Thank you for that important reminder. Yay. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm very loud. So yeah, it's a privilege to be here, and it's been really terrific to work with Lori and Julie and others from PACE over the past more than 5 years to address PFAS issues here in air. So our goal tonight is to share an update. We're far from being done with the study, but we have some early findings to share, and so we wanted to talk through those and let you know where we're headed. Before we started, I was just curious, how many people here have been to an event before or anywhere else in air about PFAS? All right, so some people, but some people maybe, are kind of newer to this. So to start off with for tonight, we'll provide an overview of PFAS, what these chemicals are before we launch into the study. Usually when I give a talk at the end is when I do all the thank yous and acknowledgements, but in putting these slides together and thinking about how much work we've accomplished, I wanted to start with the thank yous at the beginning, because to do a study like this really takes so many people that I couldn't do this work without an incredible team of people that we have. So this study, the Massachusetts PFAS in Your Health study, is led by Silent Spring Institute. So got a great team of people at Silent Spring, including Emily Heckel, our study coordinator, and Emma Ryan, one of our research assistants. They're both here in the back. We're working with other researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health. Got great colleagues at Eastern Research Group, some of whom you might have met through the study. Rebecca DeVries is here. I saw her. There she is. And Nita Gavrellis. And then working really closely with Lori and Julie and Pat Lynch and others from PACE. We're working with a hydrogeologist named Matt Hodge, who's helping us understand groundwater flow and how PFAS move through the groundwater here to go back in time and estimate past levels in the drinking water. And then for those of you who participated in the study, we had a terrific team in our study clinic at the Neshoba Valley Medical Center, and many others. And as I'll mention, we're doing a parallel study in Hyannis, so we have another set of people who helped us with the work there. Huge thanks to everyone who took part in the study, literally hundreds of people who took time out of their busy days to come to our clinic to provide a blood and urine sample and answer a long, long list of questions, and for parents to get their kids to do the same thing and come back. So huge thanks to everyone who made this study possible. And then we had to make the font really small. Anyone who works with me knows I hate small font, but we had to use small font because there are so many people in the town who supported this work. So for tonight, we'll start with a brief overview of PFAS. What are they? Where do they come from? What are the health concerns? Then Emily's going to provide an overview of the study, the timeline, what it was like for our participants to be in the study. I'll walk through a summary of our initial findings about PFAS blood levels among our participants here in AIR. For those of you who took part in the study, you should have received a results letter, and a couple people are still, I think our letter didn't find their way to you, so we will send that and get that in the mail. If you haven't gotten yours, please do contact us to let us know, and we'll get that to you. So for those of you who are in the study, we want to provide some information to help interpret your results. And for those of you who weren't, you might be interested to know what kinds of information our participants could learn, and maybe other questions that you may have as well. So Emily will talk through that part, and at the end I'll just wrap it up and talk about our next steps and some key takeaways. So PFAS is not one thing, it's not 10 things. By EPA's most recent estimate, there are over 14,000 different compounds categorized as PFAS. They all have slightly different chemical structures, but they all share certain common characteristics. They are extremely persistent in the environment. They've been dubbed forever chemicals because they just really don't break down. They've been found all across the globe in ocean water, rainwater, even in the blood of polar bears at the North Pole. So these are really global contaminants. They're also not all that new, actually. PFAS started to be widely used in consumer products in the 1950s. Think Better Living Through Chemistry and Teflon pans and Scotch-guarded rugs. So you might wonder, okay, if these have been a problem or been used for 70 years, why am I just hearing about them now? Why are they just becoming an issue? And I think that's due in large part to the widespread discovery of PFAS in drinking water all across the country and across the globe, and also because of the hard work of advocates and communities all across the country to bring this attention to light. If you want to learn more about PFAS, I would recommend the film Dark Waters, which talks about one of these community advocates and a heroic lawyer in a community in West Virginia near a DuPont plant. And much as I'd like to, I won't do a deep dive on chemistry, but just in case you like looking at chemical structures, two of the most notorious PFAS chemicals, PFOA and PFOS. So they have a long carbon chain with lots of fluorine atoms. These two and other long-chain PFAS actually have been phased out of production in the US. Unfortunately, they've been replaced by other short-chain or other types of PFAS that raise many of the same concerns. So if you go to the store, you look for PFAS on the label, you won't see it there for the most part. You might have some trade names like Vortex, Guard, or Stainmaster, grease-proof, waterproof, stain-resistant, and non-stick types of products. You guys saw toilet paper. I did see a study that found PFAS in toilet paper. That is not likely to be intentionally added, but because PFAS are so persistent, if there's any recycled paper that gets incorporated, it's possible traces could get in that way. PFAS can even be found in some cosmetics, in paints, rock climbing rope, oral beak-lined dental floss, really slippery type of dental floss is Teflon, and many, many other products in our daily lives. So they're very difficult to avoid. We can be exposed in many different ways. We can be exposed from these consumer products that are in our homes and schools and workplaces. We can be exposed through drinking water. So some drinking water supplies are highly contaminated if they're close to industrial facilities. High levels are also found near many fire training areas at military bases and airports because of a class of firefighting foam called AFFF. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And lower levels can get into the environment from landfill leachate or wastewater treatment plant effluent. We can also be exposed through food, both because of food packaging like microwave popcorn bags, but also because the food we eat, the plants and animals we eat can absorb PFAS from their surroundings, and PFAS can work their way up the food chain as well. So, not surprisingly, these are... Oh,
we have a request now to turn it down a little bit.
To turn it, well, maybe...
Is that this thing?
That could be that thing. I mean, I can hold it further away.
Anybody know how?
Okay, I'll talk less loud.
Oh, here.
All right.
Try it now.
Okay, how's that?
Is that better?
Is that less loud?
Yeah. Better?
So, not surprisingly, because these chemicals last forever, they're in all these products, they can also accumulate in our bodies. Basically, everybody who's had their blood tested for PFAS has some measurable level of PFAS in their blood. According to testing done by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, over 99% of people in the US have PFAS in their blood. Some PFAS can stay in our bodies for really long amounts of time. So the PFAS and PFOA, the ones I showed you a couple slides ago, can stay in our bodies for years. The good news is that if you stop exposure, the levels will go down over time, and we're seeing that in the general population, but it can take a while. These newer replacement chemicals like short-chain PFAS don't stick around for years in our bodies, but they do stick around for weeks or months. And many PFAS, we don't know how long they might stay in our bodies. You might wonder who's likely to have the highest levels of PFAS in our bodies. In general, we see among adults that older adults have higher levels than younger adults, and because these chemicals, we accumulate them more quickly than we excrete them. In kids, sometimes we see the opposite trend actually, where infants and young children can have higher levels, and this is because PFAS can be passed along from moms to babies during pregnancy and through breastfeeding. In general, men have higher levels than women, at least in the premenopausal years. This is because PFAS bind to proteins in our blood. So when women menstruate, we actually lose some of the PFAS from our bodies that way. We see less of a difference in postmenopausal years. Women don't have that loss pathway. And again, women do pass the chemicals along to their children during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And then occupation matters too. So if you work at a Teflon manufacturing plant, if you're a firefighter, you may have higher than average exposures through on-the-job exposures. And all of this is concerning because from what we do know about PFAS, PFAS can affect our health in many different ways. And I won't read every single one of these, but I'll just mention a few that have gotten particular attention. One of the types of health effects most concretely linked to PFAS exposures is suppression of the immune system, and this is manifested in decreased antibody response to routine vaccinations, particularly in kids. There can be other autoimmune effects where PFAS actually seem to increase the autoimmune response to things like ulcerative colitis. There can be developmental effects, so in laboratory studies, decreases in, or changes in bone density. There are small decreases in birth weight in babies. Silent Spring Institute is an organization focused on breast cancer prevention. We're concerned to see some PFAS can impair mammary gland development. In laboratory animals, we think that's a marker for chemicals that can increase breast cancer risk. And high exposures to PFAS have been linked to other types of cancer like testicular and kidney cancer. So there are many communities across the country that are addressing PFAS in their drinking water, and as Jake mentioned, the EPA just passed new standards, so more communities are going to start testing and discovering that PFAS are an issue. And air is no exception. As you've heard already, PFAS have been an issue in the public water supply here in air. So PFAS were first discovered in air drinking water in 2016. We know that areas close to fire training areas can be at risk for PFAS, and because of the former Fort Devens and the use of AFFF firefighting foams, there was concern about the air water supply. The highest levels of PFAS were found in the Grove Pond wells, which are located close to the former Fort Devens site, and so the suspected source of contamination are firefighting foams from the former Fort Devens site. The good news is that the town has been really responsive and proactive in terms of putting in place treatment to filter out the PFAS. So the Grove Pond wells, which have the higher levels of PFAS, started to be treated back in November of 2020. Spectacle Pond wells are not affected by the Fort Devens site. There seem to be other sources of PFAS in that area leading to lower levels of contamination, and those wells are now also being treated. So one important takeaway is that all air tap water is now being filtered for PFAS, and so that's a huge accomplishment of the town to have taken really important and prompt action to address the issue. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our, yes, good for air. Give air a round of applause for filtering the water and to Pace for being a strong advocate in the community. So I'm happy to share the microphone tonight with Emily Heckel, who's our amazing study coordinator and a staff scientist at Silent Spring, to tell you more about our study.
Great, thank you, Laurel. So I'll just begin by thanking all of our study participants and anybody who helped us out with recruitment, enrollment, anything like that. We had a lot of support from the town and from everybody in it, so that was great. I'm just going to start by going over the study and a little bit of a timeline here. So we're part of a larger study called the Multi-Site Health Study that's funded and coordinated by the Center for Disease Control and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or ATSDR. And the goal of this study was to improve our understanding of PFAS-related health effects. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. This map here shows our other study communities. Our target study population size was 7,000 adults and 2,100 children. It's across all sites, and you can see Massachusetts is one of the 7 on the map. The Massachusetts PFAS in Your Health study is our Massachusetts part of the larger multi-site study. We had 2 communities in the study, Air, and another community, Hyannis, Mass. Hyannis also had a PFAS exposure from AFFF firefighting foam. In their case, it was from a county fire training academy and a local airport. Our enrollment goal was 1,000 adults and 300 children across both communities. That was the same for all sites in the study, regardless of size. When we recruited for the study, we included both former and current residents of Air. Our research partners are also on this slide on the left. I think Laurel mentioned most of our research partners during the acknowledgements at the beginning. We partnered with Harvard School of Public Health, Eastern Research Group, PACE, who Lori is here tonight as well, and the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, which is based in Hyannis. This is just a timeline of the study. So in September of 2019, we were awarded a grant from CDC and ATSDR. Prior to this, they had put forth a call for proposals where investigators partnered with local community groups and applied for the opportunity to be a part of the study. So in September of 2019, we were awarded the grant. We hit some roadblocks due to COVID. This was before my time with Silent Spring. This is what I've heard, is that it caused some disruptions generally in our lives, including with the study. In September 2021, we received, I'm just gonna back up a little bit. The CDC ATSDR received approval for the study protocols. So there was also some time in between where we received the grant, but we were still developing kind of how to operationalize everything and how to put protocols in place for how to conduct the study. In 2021, we finally launched enrollment in our Hyannis site, and then a year later, we launched enrollment in AIR. At the end of, or at the fall of 2023, we completed data collection across both sites, and at that point, we were required to kind of wrap that up so we could move on to our data analysis phase. We had a little bit more time in Hyannis. Originally, we had intended to move our site from Hyannis to AIR, but we wanted the opportunity to continue recruiting participants in Hyannis as well once we opened our study site in AIR. We had a site located at the Neshoba Valley Medical Center, which if you participated, you would have visited us there. June of 2024, we're having community meetings with both sites. We held community meetings in Hyannis last week, and this week we're here with you in AIR. This is just a little bit about our community outreach. So we had several methods that we used for recruiting people for the study. If you live in AIR and you're on the public water supply, you likely received a postcard, which we sent out to everybody. We also tabled at the transfer station and town events, including Election Day. We had a lot of people sign up that day, so you might have seen us at our table here. Those are two of our field staff, Bianca and Ian, and then Lizzie, who was our summer intern last year, tabling. We also had signs around town. A lot of people signed up about the study that way. We had flyers, we had kind of word of mouth. A lot of people were really helpful in getting the word out, and the town was very supportive of us and letting us put signs everywhere, which was great. This is just a little bit more about our community outreach. We held some community events as well, and we also posted on social media. This is our phlebotomist, Virginia, posted about her on our Instagram page. And then we had an event this was last summer in AIR, talking about you know what? That is more recent. We had an event here last summer in this room that was just giving an update on the study and what we had done so far. So just to talk a little bit about how people qualified to participate in the study, we basically just required that you lived in AIR during the study period, which was between May 2006 and February 2018. The reason we had a study window is that people lived in AIR prior to 2006. That's just kind of a long time ago, and because of the half-lives of the chemicals that were in the water, it's possible that after that, the exposures that they may have had to PFAS were not from the town of AIR. Drinking water. So that's why we kind of started it. If you lived in AIR 50 years ago, if you had PFAS in your blood, it probably was not from the drinking water. So that was kind of the reason for that cutoff. And then the February 2018 is when they started to filter the water in the AIR public water supply. So we basically wanted people who had lived in the town during the time where the levels exceeded EPA guidelines for the PFAS that we were studying. The children, similar eligibility criteria. They had to have lived in AIR during the study period. Another option is that their birth mothers could have lived in AIR during the study period, and that's because, as I believe Laurel mentioned, PFAS can be passed on through pregnancy and breastfeeding. Former residents were also eligible, and multiple members of the same household could participate, so we had a number of families enroll. Firefighters and workers from PFAS industrial sites were not eligible for the study. Anybody who had an occupational exposure, that's because we wanted to look specifically at exposure from drinking water. So just a little bit about what participants did. This will be familiar to you if you did participate. We first did an eligibility screening by phone, and if you qualified, then we would have you come in for an office visit. During the office visit, we went through an informed consent process. We collected blood and urine samples and body measurements. We did some more typical body measurements, such as height, weight, and blood pressure, and also our site collected some additional information using novel measures, such as a Tanita scale, which measures body composition. We also administered questionnaires by phone, where we collected information on residential history, employment history, and then we also collected information on diet and consumer product use, what foods people consume and what products are around their house, and then a little bit about health history and family health history. For children, we also did neurobehavioral testing. So that was if your kids came in and did this test. It was mostly some vocabulary exercises, drawing and puzzles, and that was on a third separate visit. So what are we looking for? We are looking for the levels of 7 different PFAS in blood, and that's how we measured PFAS exposure. We also looked at routine lab tests, such as cholesterol, thyroid hormones, liver enzymes, and others. So this is, if you participated, you would have received these results soon after participating, and it would have looked like maybe a report you get from your doctor. That was just some ways for us to measure health effects. And then some additional tests that we added for just the Massachusetts site, we looked at some additional PFAS beyond the 7 PFAS that everybody looked at. And we also looked at metabolomics, which is looking at kind of how PFAS moves through the biochemical pathways in your body. And we also did COVID antibody testing for some of our participants, since PFAS can have some immune effects as well. This shows our enrollment in comparison to other sites. So you can see we're kind of in the middle. We did have a smaller study population compared to other sites. We were working with smaller towns, so I think we did pretty well, especially considering the number of children we were able to enroll. And this just kind of shows what the other sites were able to enroll as well. This is just the number of people who participated overall. We're counting here just people at the top who screened for the study. So in AIR, you can see we had 380 adults and 79 children screened. Some people were not eligible for the study if they had an occupation that exposed them to PFAS chemicals, for example, if they were a firefighter, or if they lived outside of the study area. We also were not able to enroll people who were on private wells. Some people did not participate following being eligible. The next line shows just the number of completed blood draws and questionnaires. So we had 291 people complete both the blood draw and the questionnaire, and 291 adults and 48 children for AIR. And then you can see our Hyannis numbers and kind of our totals on either side. That was just an overview of the study, and I'm going to hand it back to Laurel to talk about a summary of the PFAS blood levels in AIR.
Great, thank you, Emily. Right here. So first we're going to talk a little bit about the participants who took part in our study. So our median age for adults was 58 years of age, which is somewhat higher than the general population, where the median for adults is in early 40s. We had about twice as many women as men take part in the study. The numbers were more similar for kids, actually more boys than girls. In terms of race and ethnicity, the vast majority of our participants were non-Hispanic white, with smaller numbers of Hispanic and other people of other races as well. So before we dive into a summary table with the results, I just wanted to hit on a few key terms in case you haven't thought about statistics in a while. So we talked about median age, right? So median means like the middle of the distribution. So when we're talking about age, the median means half the people are older and half the people are younger. When we talk about blood levels, the median means half the people have a higher level and half the people have a lower level. The 95th percentile means 95% of people have a lower level and 5% have a higher level. So it kind of indicates that top 5%. Minimum is the lowest level that we measured, maximum is the highest level that we measured. So I know it's got a lot of numbers and I'm going to talk you through all the parts of this. So what this is showing are the results of PFAS blood tests combined across the whole community here in air. The units that we're using for this are micrograms per liter. It's the same as nanograms per milliliter, same as parts per billion. So at pretty much any numbers you'll see for blood levels will be sort of interchangeable, but sometimes people use different units to express that. And anywhere where you see a less than 0.1 means that the chemical was not detected for that specific statistic. So I'm going to walk you through this step by step. So what we've got here on the left are the names of the 7 PFAS chemicals that we tested for in people's blood. And that second column there is showing the percent of people that had a detectable level of this chemical. So I'm going to look at the first 4 rows here, and this is the percent of people that have this chemical detected. Nearly all participants in the study had this chemical detected. I will add that in the general population, the same thing is true. Again, we talked about how CDC testing has found these chemicals in many different people's blood. So these are very comparable, actually, to the general population. There are 3 other PFAS chemicals that were detected in fewer participants, and for the future slides, we're just going to really focus on those first 4, the most frequently found chemicals. And then, for those of you who don't think about PFAS all day long, all the names of the chemicals look almost the same. They all basically start with something that says PF. So just wanted to point out 2 specific chemicals, PFOS and PFHXS. These are chemicals that tend to be the ones that are most elevated in communities that have had exposures caused by firefighting foam, and that's because these 2 chemicals, the ones that end in S, are the ones that are common constituents of that AFFF firefighting foam. So in air, we did find that PFOS, PFHXS, and a third chemical called PFOA were found at the highest levels in the air community, and that you can see the median levels were the highest in the 95th percentile, and also the maximum levels were the highest. And that's consistent also with the fact that these were chemicals that were also found in especially in the Grove Pond and also in the Spectacle Pond wells. So you might wonder it's a quick question, just.
It can be at the end.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that we cover everything, but we'll definitely have time for questions. So I mentioned earlier that PFAS levels tend to be higher in older adults, and we did see that trend here. So people who were age 65 and older, their median levels for PFOS and PFHXS were about twice that of younger adults, ages 18 to 44. So our adult participants, so these were everyone age 18 and up, their median levels were higher than the levels in kids, and our kids were ages 4 to 17. Generally, the adults had levels that were about twice those of children, and this is the median level. And then I mentioned earlier, too, that in the general population, we often see that men have higher levels of PFAS than women, and we also did see that trend here as well, and particularly for PFOS, PFHXS, and PFOA. So you might say, okay, what do these numbers mean? Are they higher than people in the general population? You know, were there elevated exposures here related to the past water contamination? So we need a comparison for the general population to answer that question. And so where we turn to answer that question is what's called NHANES. So this is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. So this is a study that's conducted by the CDC. It covers many more things than just PFAS or chemicals. It has asks people to answer questions about diet, and they also measure blood and urine samples for PFAS and other types of chemicals as well. So NHANES is intended to be a representative sampling, so they include about 5,000 people every 2 years as part of this study. The most recent NHANES data that we have for PFAS comes from 2017 to 2018. And CDC tested blood levels of PFAS for 2,000 people. Again, they sampled in a way that was intended to be representative of the general population. We should have had data for 2019 to 2020, but there was a disruption because of COVID. So we're hopeful to have more recent data, but I did want to flag that our most recent data is several years old at this point. And the reason why that's important for thinking about interpreting the results is that levels of these long-chain PFAS are going down in the general population. So we've got the 4 PFAS chemicals that we found at the highest levels. You'll see that those are also these are the most frequently found in the general population. And you'll notice this downward trend. This is related to the fact that industry stopped manufacturing these chemicals starting in the early 2000s. We don't have more recent data than 2017 to 2018, but we suspect that the levels have continued to go down in the general population. So now I want to walk you through a different graph, and this is where we're comparing median levels here in air, it's in the blue bars, to the levels in Hyannis in the gray bars, and then the levels in the general population from that NHANES testing in the yellowy orange bars. And I wanted to, before I get into the numbers, I wanted to just make a note that I mentioned that the median age of our participants was older than the general population. And we also saw that older people have higher levels than younger people. So even if there hadn't been any water contamination, we would expect that our study participants would have above average levels than the general population simply based on age. Fortunately, we're able to account for that with our statistics, and I won't go into the details of it, but to make a long story short, we were able to calculate what the median levels in our air participants would have been if we had the same age distribution as the general population. So that if we do see differences between air and the general population, it's not because the participants were older. So that's what it means, that note in the corner that says these are adjusted for the age distribution of our participants. So I'm going to walk you through this graph now. Again, these are median concentrations. I'm going to point your attention first to PFH excess. And PFH excess is the PFAS that does tend to be most elevated in communities with a history of firefighting from contamination. And for this, we saw that the median level in air was about 24% higher than the general US population, at least the levels in 2017 to 2018. My guess is that for all these yellowy orange bars, that the current levels would be a bit lower, again, because of that downward trend. For the other 3 chemicals, though, we didn't really see a difference between we either saw that the air levels were lower than the general population or that the levels were similar. So looking at PFOS, the median level was 2.8 micrograms per liter, and in the general population during that earlier cycle from 2017 to 2018, the levels were actually higher, up at 4.7. I'm not going to focus too much on Hyannis because we're talking about the air data, but you might wonder why the Hyannis bars are higher, and that's consistent with the fact that the levels of PFAS in the Hyannis water were much higher than those here in air. So we see that reflected in the blood levels. For PFOA, we don't see much of a difference either in Hyannis or in air compared to the general population, and same for PFNA. So it's encouraging news to see that it's frustrating to see that everybody in the US has PFAS in their blood, but these results are showing that the levels in air really weren't that much higher than the general population. So with that, I'm going to hand this back to Emily, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions. I know that was a lot of data to go through, but we wanted to focus for a while at the individual level on interpreting individual people's blood results. So, Emily?
Thank you. So like Laurel said, I'm just going to talk through a little bit about how to interpret your results if you were a study participant. And if you were not a study participant, it might also be helpful to talk through how to interpret somebody's PFAS blood results, if you ever choose to get your blood tested. This is how we send it out to people. This isn't what it would look like if you went to a lab or something, you know, just to kind of clarify. We tried to make it really clear as best as we could. So this is a sample of a report back letter that we've sent to our study participants. You'll see your results in the column next to the chemicals, and those will be the results of this person's PFAS blood tests. This is a participant that we made up. This isn't somebody's actual data. Next to your results, you'll see Laura was talking about NHANES, the national survey. This is just the results for the particular age group of this participant. This is the category, the age group that matches their age from the NHANES survey. So this person is an adult, they're 20 plus years old, it's a big category. So the numbers that are on the right side here are not that person's results, but those are some averages that come from the national. Sorry, did I do that?
No, I'm sorry, I'm trying to adjust it.
Maybe try putting the mic in the holder, because that'll hold it away from your mouth a little bit.
Is it too loud still?
Yeah.
Say
Just
something,
test,
Emily.
test, please.
Test. Can I hold it further away? Is that helpful? Is that good? Okay. Is that better? All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, just to backtrack a little bit, you see the participants' results on one side, and then on the other side, we show some averages that are in the same age group as this participant. This shows the median as well as the 95th percentile. So you can kind of see in this report that we bolded one of the values. For PFH excess, this person's result is 12.5. These are all concentrations. And we bolded that because that number is well above the 3.80 in the 95th percentile. So we want to show that for this person, that result is higher than 95% of the national average for that chemical. So we're getting a lot of statistics lessons today. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming. But we did this for everybody's results, so everyone's a little different. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's also a sum at the bottom of the 7 PFAS results that just adds up all of the concentrations. This is just showing how it's broken down. These are the 7 different PFAS chemicals. For PFOA and PFOS, we have 2 what are called isomers. And we don't need to get too much into that, but those are just, I guess there's 9 values total. These are 7 PFAS chemicals that we looked at. And those are the ones that if you add those up, it'll total the 25 value at the bottom, those 7 PFAS. Again, this is just looking at a comparison to the general US population. I think I already talked through most of this, just we included just the median and the 95th percentile. And the bolded values that I mentioned here, that 12.5 is just, again, showing that for this person, the value was above the 95th percentile for that chemical. The reason why we summed the 7 PFAS, or one of the reasons, is so that we could compare it to screening benchmarks from the National Academies report. So this is the sum of the 7 PFAS, 25 at the bottom here. And just a little bit about the National Academies report. This was put out in 2022, and this was guidance on PFAS exposure testing and clinical follow-up that was aimed at clinicians. So this was the first time that a national organization had made any sort of statement saying that perhaps people in PFAS exposed communities could benefit from getting their blood tested. Prior to that, it was recommended mostly that this be done through research studies and that we should be looking at population levels. But this guidance was actually came out and said that people from these PFAS impacted communities may want to get their blood tested. It may be beneficial. And it was informed by community leaders from communities that had been impacted by PFAS exposure, who said that they wanted to get their blood tests and that it would empower them to possibly avoid future exposures to PFAS. So this is a guidance, again, aimed at clinicians. Oftentimes, doctors don't know a whole lot about PFAS. I don't know if anybody has had the experience of bringing their PFAS results to their doctor or mentioning PFAS to their doctor. Some do and some don't. And I think that everybody is learning more about PFAS every day since now it's in the news everywhere. But for a long time, it wasn't the case that it was part of clinical care. So that's why we kind of wanted to include this guidance. This and I'll go through this on the next page, but there's some recommendations in this NASEM guideline about clinical screenings and lab tests that doctors may want to give their patients depending on that patient's PFAS blood levels. So if you'd like to scan, there's a QR code on the screen if anybody would like to scan it, and it'll bring you to resources. And we also have some handouts if you wanted to grab those on your way out. This is just a snapshot directly from the NASEM guidelines. So again, the guidelines that are aimed at clinicians, doctors, and other providers. So for people in the first category here, where you have less than 2 micrograms per liter PFAS, this just says clinicians should provide usual standard of care. Not very many people at all fall into this category. I don't think really just about anybody in our study fell into this category, because as Laura was mentioning before, all of us just about have PFAS in our blood. Most people fall into the second category, 2 to 20, and this section recommends that clinicians should mostly practice just general screenings that most people get anyways. Screenings for dyslipidemia is referring to screening for cholesterol and other lipids. Screening for hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, so like high blood pressure during pregnancy at all prenatal visits, and screening for breast cancer. It also includes here, screening for cholesterol in children, which I've heard from people is not something that they've routinely had done, although it could be that it's part of routine care. But this is kind of just recommending that they stay on top of these routine screenings. For patients with 20 or higher, in addition to the usual standard of care, this recommends that they prioritize screening for high cholesterol and other lipids, like even younger. And then it has a couple of other tests listed here, looking at thyroid function testing, since that has been associated with PFAS exposure, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, and a few other items. So, and this is a lot to take in, but we have this printed out on some sheets if you'd like to take it on your way out. This slide shows that air had a lower proportion of adults above the 20 micrograms per liter, which was that kind of final category than the general population. We can see here that air has 4% of participants, so this is from people who participated in our study. 4% of participants had their 7 PFAS sum over 20 micrograms per liter. And in the general US population, we see 13%. I think Laurel mentioned this when she was talking about NHANES. The report was something, they collected the data in 2017 and 18, so it's been a few years between the data collection for the NHANES and for our study. And we do know that PFAS levels are declining overall in the US population, so that could be one reason for why why air is lower. I think, let me just go back to that really quick. Yeah, this is what we found for our study. These are some resources for clinicians and blood testing on top of the NASEM guidelines. These were developed by another study called PFAS REACH prior to when the National Academy Guidelines came out. They're available on the PFAS Exchange, so you can scan the QR code if you'd like to access these resources or go to the website. These are also medical screening guidance documents for clinicians and patients, and they were put forth just in an effort to guide conversations between doctors and patients about PFAS, since there just weren't a lot of guidelines at this time. There's information about PFAS blood testing as well on this page. So there's a lot of information. If you go to the PFAS Exchange, you can kind of read through it, but one of the resources they provide is a list of labs that you can go to if you'd like to get your PFAS blood tested, for PFAS. Just gonna advance to the next slide here. This is just some more information about how to go about that. So if you did not participate in the study and you're interested in getting your blood tested for PFAS, there are a few things that you could do. Some clinicians can order blood tests. It may or may not be covered by insurance, and the out-of-pocket costs can be between like $200 and $300, so it's not necessarily accessible for everybody, unfortunately. Some labs offer PFAS blood testing. If you did want to choose to try to go yourself to get your blood tested for PFAS, they're listed on this website, the PFAS I think it brings you to the same page as the one before. One option that they have now that's kind of unique is that you can do a finger prick test at home, so you don't have to go get your blood drawn, and you can send it into the lab. And Quest Health also has options for you to go to one of their labs and get your blood tested. I don't know if it's every lab or you just kind of have to look around for one, but there should be some more information available on this site. And there's, again, the QR code. And we have these, this is just a copy of some of the guidance that we've been talking about, that PFAS Reach put out about blood testing for individuals. And we have those available on the table by the door. This is just kind of a way to end on a little bit of a hopeful note. There are ways that we all can reduce our exposures to PFAS. So this applies to everybody, whether or not you were in the study or whether or not you had a PFAS exposure from drinking water. You can select products that are not labeled as steam and water resistant, since PFAS are often in those types of products. You can avoid microwave popcorn. Unfortunately, the bags of microwave popcorn, they use PFAS in order to create that kind of like grease resistance in the bags. You can generally eat more fresh foods since they have found PFAS in different types of food packaging, which is, I guess, healthy overall. And you can avoid any products, including some cosmetics, with fluoro in the ingredients, since PFAS are fluoroalkyl substances. If you remember Laurel's chemistry lesson from earlier, just that prefix fluoro is something that you might want to avoid if you're looking to get PFAS-free products. Believe it's in things like some waterproof mascaras and things like that in terms of cosmetics. You can also minimize your contact with fluorinated ski and floor waxes. They now make ski waxes that are PFAS, I believe they're PFAS-free. Yes, so some of them are PFAS-free now and they will be labeled fluorinated, so that one you can generally avoid by looking at the package, as well as floor wax. Another tip is just to look for products that say PFAS-free. They don't all say PFAS-free, and some of them might say something like PFOA-free. That means that they're just free from that one chemical. So unfortunately, we can't rely on that label. As Laurel mentioned, there's thousands of chemicals that fall into the category of PFAS, but if it says PFAS-free, PFAS, then that should be more reliable. You can also look at Silent Spring's Detox Me smartphone app. This is available for Apple and Android phones, and this kind of takes you through some tips on how to avoid exposures to PFAS as well as other everyday chemicals in products. And I will now hand this back to Laurel. Hopefully the mic was better.
I'm just going to insert a couple of comments here. What Emily just described to you is ways that you can and should advocate for yourself. I have become very active with speaking to my doctors, and at this stage I'm seeing a lot of specialists, you know. It's really potluck about which doctors seem to know a little bit about PFAS and which ones have no clue. And so we go to Active Medical Associates, and a number of people from our study also go to Active Medical Associates, and I've been telling my primary doctor about PFAS issues for several years now. So my doctor knew about it, but I happened to go to an urgent care appointment last week at Active Medical. So I thought Active Medical in general was knowledgeable. No, this other doctor that I had never seen had no idea even what PFAS was. Never heard of it. So you need to advocate for yourselves, bring this information with you. They need it. I'm on other committees where we're trying to figure out how to reach the doctors. We don't really know how to reach the doctors. It's just another one of the things that they have to try to be aware of. So you really need to, I'm going to encourage you to advocate for yourself, and you know, if you have ideas on how we can reach those medical staff, that's the next thing we want to do, is help people know that this is a serious issue and we should all be following it.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, just a couple more slides here, and then we'll have time for your questions. So what's next for our study? We've sort of reached this initial phase. Of course, everyone's bigger question is about health effects and what can our study tell us about how PFAS can affect our health. So now that all the data have finished being collected, we're in the process of working with ATSDR and with the other 6 sites in the study to analyze the data and to answer these bigger picture questions about how PFAS levels can affect our health. So for people across all of our sites, do people with higher levels of PFAS in their blood have higher levels of some of these markers of health effects like cholesterol or changes in thyroid hormone levels? Are they more likely to self-report certain types of health effects? For our participants here in Massachusetts, we are conducting some additional analyses to learn more about different types of PFAS in people's blood and answer some other questions like about COVID. When we started the study, we would have never imagined people would be so keenly interested in antibody levels and thinking about vaccinations. And people in PFAS impacted communities have had concerns and questions about whether they would have been more vulnerable to COVID itself, and then whether the vaccines might in any way be less effective for people with the highest exposures. Another part of the study we don't have time to get into tonight is to go back in time to try to recreate past exposures. So we're working with a groundwater hydrologist to go back in time. PFAS are pretty new, and before 2016 we don't have any measurements of what the levels were like. But for our health study, it's very helpful for us to try to distinguish between the person who lived in air their whole life and had a longer cumulative lifetime exposure, to distinguish that from someone who maybe moved more recently. They might have similar levels in their blood now, but going back in time 10, 20 years ago, we want to be able to know more about their longer term exposure, because these effects of PFAS typically are chronic and can kind of accumulate over long amounts of time. And we want to continue to provide updates to all of you in the community to share what we learn along the way. So some big key takeaway points, or I guess too long didn't read, is that the social media tag? So AIR is part of a major CDC study to understand PFAS health effects. In the PFAS world, this study is a really big deal. It's a really big study in terms of the number of people in the study. It's impressive in that it's combining information from all these different sites. Some of the sites are, like here in AIR, the source of contamination is firefighting foam, but other sites are industrial sites. And so we can learn something about the different mixtures of PFAS that were present in these different communities. In terms of what we've learned so far, the good news is that the median levels of PFAS here in AIR were generally similar to the general US population, and lower than what we saw in Hyannis, and that reflects the fact that the levels in the water here were not nearly as elevated as they were in Hyannis. An analysis of the data to look for links to health effects is ongoing. It's going to take a long time to get through all of the data. We want to learn as much as we can, but the fact that it's such a large study and there's so much visibility of the study means that the study is a really important opportunity to inform future regulations and also to inform clinical guidance and hopefully healthcare, so that when people go to the doctor, like Lori was saying, she went to a different doctor who hadn't heard of PFAS. We're going to change that so that doctors are aware and that this can be incorporated into people's medical histories and improve diagnoses. So with that, here's our contact info for Emily and myself. And if you have any questions about the study, if you never got it or would like another copy of your test results, please do reach out to our team. And that's the link to our study website. So thank you. We do have a survey too. We would love your feedback about this event so that we can make future events better. We have paper copies. Those of you who like to do things on your phone, you can also scan this code with your phone as well and do it that way.
Can you go back to the page before for a second?
Sure thing. All right, and with that, we're going to do questions. And we've got some questions online, so we're going to alternate back and forth, keep our Zoom remote participants engaged. So
we have about 30 people on Zoom as well, so it's a nice turnout. I just wanted to ask, how many of you found out about this through an email that you received? How about you saw a poster? Okay. How about you saw it in the Action Unlimited? Others? Cool. Okay, that's good to know.
Social media?
Okay, we're up for questions and answers. We're going to need to repeat your question, and I have trouble hearing from the back. So
she asked first.
You had your hand up a while ago. Why did you go first? And I'll repeat that for you in Zoom. I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why you didn't provide means. Why is it median?
Good question. Good statistical question. So why did we present medians instead of means?
Or both?
Or both. Well, I was trying to make the slides simpler rather than more complicated. It's a good question. So I think they would be sort of similar. A median really tells you about sort of the middle. So if you have a couple of people who are really high, they can really bring that average up, but they won't really change the median. So for this, we wanted to get a sense of where the middle value was. But the mean or the average is also a useful way to convey that sort of middle value. But medians and these percentiles are a more common way to compare distributions. Can we do a question from the Zoom?
Yeah, actually sort of related to that, someone asked, what would you do with data that was collected that was clearly an outlier? And they asked because one of their levels was extremely low. So they're wondering what you would do with outlier data.
Did they say if there was levels of PFAS that were low or levels of?
One of my levels was extremely low due to issues unaffected by PFAS. So I'm not.
So maybe a health marker. So the question was about how would we handle outliers or account for the fact that some people have diseases or health outcomes that might not be linked to PFAS. And then that's going to happen in any population. I think that's why it's important to do these types of studies in larger populations so that there's that variability in many of the types of health effects linked to PFAS are also caused by many other factors as well. When we have a larger study population, we can start to learn more about whether certain things have people have higher levels or lower levels of certain markers. If they have high PFAS, is there a difference between that high PFAS group and that low PFAS group? So we're able to account for that statistically. I think one in the back.
If I remember correctly, I took part in the study, and one of the questions was about whether or not I filtered my water at home. And I wonder if you have data about people who did versus people who didn't filter their water at home.
That's a great question. So someone wants to know, in our questionnaire, we asked about water filtration. So what are we going to do with that information? And can we figure out whether people who use filters had higher levels or not? So that is a question that we can answer. We can look at whether people drink filtered water or if they drink bottled water. That was also part of the questionnaire. So that's one question that we can answer. And then the other reason we ask that question is that when we go back in time, we're working with the hydrogeologist to figure out what was in the water in past years. But for each participant, we also ask where you lived, how much water you drank, and we're trying to go back in time to figure out how much PFAS you might have been exposed to from the water. So if you said you drank all bottled water, we're able to account for that. If you filtered your water using a filter that's likely to get out the PFAS, then we're able to account for that as well. And the goal for that is to estimate people's PFAS in their blood over time to look at that cumulative. But the type of question that you're asking is, whether people filtered their water for their lower PFAS in their blood. We could answer that question.
So what you showed us tonight doesn't take that variable into account?
Correct. This is just based on the level of PFAS in participants' blood when they came in for their study office visit.
Do you anticipate doing that and letting us know the results?
We certainly can. That would be something that would be again, the health effects work will take the longest amount of time, but those kinds of interim questions, whether we see differences between people who lived in air longer versus shorter, whether we're also going to try to take into account where in the town you lived. If you live closer to the Grove Pond wells, those were the wells that had the highest levels, you're likely to have had somewhat higher exposures from the water. People on the other side of town who got more of their water from the Spectacle Pond wells, the water doesn't all mix in one big central tank, so there's some gradient of exposure. So we'll be able to answer questions like that. Thank you. On the Zoom?
Yes, someone asked, could study participants have self-selected as being aware and careful of their health? They asking about, particularly where some of the levels in air were lower than in the general population. And asking about selecting into the study.
selecting into the study. So whether we had people who might have had lower levels because of their consumer product patterns. Do you want it? I can use it, but do you want it? I don't want to do all the talking.
Sure, I can try to answer that. If you have anything to add, let me know. So I think.
Just repeat the question.
Oh, so the question was if there was any chance that people may have self-selected into the study who had healthier behaviors than the average person. Is that right? Because we had shown that some of the PFAS levels in air were lower than the general population. Yeah, so I think that's always, there's always a possibility of bias when you're recruiting for a study. People who are interested in PFAS may have been interested, or if they were interested in lowering their exposure to PFAS, they may have been the same people who were interested in participating in a PFAS study. I think that's what the question was asking. There is always a chance of that. I think that when we look at the data on people's behaviors, we have a lot of data on people's diet and consumer product use and on their water filters, as somebody else just mentioned in the audience. I think that might tell us a little bit more about kind of what population we're working with, and if we do have a population where everybody's filtering their water or everybody's avoiding PFAS in consumer products, that might tell us something. I can't really speak to that yet, but anecdotally, I feel like it's going to vary a little bit. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think that's a great answer. We do have information about people's consumer product patterns from the questionnaire. And again, I do think that if we had comparable data for the general population at the same time, that we probably wouldn't see that air was lower. So we'll be able to answer that because the CDC at some point will release those results so we can make that comparison.
Someone said that PFAS was first detected in 2016 in air. Is that because that was the first year it was tested for PFAS, or?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So the question was, PFAS were first found in air drinking water in 2016. Is that because that's the first time anyone looked for it? And the answer is yes.
Are there any health conditions or health markers that you tested for that are different for air than the general population, as far as you've detected thus far?
So we haven't really looked into the question. Sorry. So you're asking if we found certain health conditions to be more common in our participants compared to the general population. So that's the kind of analysis where we haven't done yet. You have to take into account age distribution and a whole bunch of other factors. You can't just look at a percent. So we're not ready to talk about that yet. For some health conditions, we might be able to make a comparison just based on the air population. But for most of them, we really will be looking at air data in combination with all of the other sites to have more statistical power to look for those kinds of differences. Any more from the Zoom?
Yeah, someone asked, they were curious if other towns around Devens, like Shirley and Harvard, might have concerns with PFAS as well, or is it mostly air?
I'm going to let Lori answer that one.
If I heard the question is, do other towns around us also have PFAS? Yes. Littleton has PFAS, Harvard has PFAS, Broughton has PFAS near the high school. Westminster has a very severe problem with PFAS in a particular place because of an organic fertilizing company that didn't realize that they were importing what they thought was organic materials. It was coated paper from, I think, from somewhere in Boston, and the coating had PFAS on it. So they unknowingly contaminated in very large amounts all the neighborhoods around them because they all have private water. They all have different situations. Harvard is mostly on private water, and there's some wells in Harvard. Even in air, where there are a handful of people who have private wells, and we don't know where PFAS has come from, that they have also found it in their wells. There also was this, just to give you a base to compare, I attended a workshop where I learned about a study that was done in New Hampshire, and they wanted to study a place that did not have PFAS in the soil and the groundwater, compared to places that they knew that did. And they looked at 100 sites, including very remote areas in the mountains. They found no sites that did not have PFAS. It's everywhere. So if you see the movie Laurel mentioned at the beginning, Dark Waters, or the one we showed last month, The Poison in Us All, it's pretty scary. We need to turn the tap off. And I did find the flyers about the bill, if you want to go and check more findings.
All right, in the back.
Can we look at the overall levels of the other sites in comparison to, I mean, we saw Air and Hyannis, but what about the other ones nationally that were involved in this study?
So I'm not ready to share yet for the other sites. We're all sort of working through our own data individually. So ATSDR, in addition to leading this study, also conducted a series of exposure assessments in 10 communities across the country. They weren't doing all the health effects part, but just similarly doing PFAS blood testing. And there were some communities, the question was how air stacks up to other sites within the study. There were some other sites in that where the levels, I'd say the levels in air were at the low end compared to the other sites in that study.
Yeah, well, another Zoom question. Based on what you were talking about earlier in terms of PFAS in consumer products, they're asking specifically about, they're interested in learning more about PFAS in menstrual pads, and if they're in all menstrual pads or just some of them.
So the question is about PFAS in menstrual pads, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head of how common they are. I have seen that there's been evidence or testing that has shown PFAS in some, but I would.
Is that on the PFAS app though?
So we don't have specific brand information there. I don't know, do you know more about that study or could say more? I feel like I saw the headlines about it, but I didn't report.
I read that the underwear that's supposed to be for menstrual has it in it for sure.
Yeah, so some of the menstrual underwear, yes, again, to be, fluid resistant, I guess, has PFAS in it. Again, for a lot of these, it's like some do and some don't, and it can be very challenging as a consumer to figure out which ones do.
Have they tested disposable diapers?
I don't know if disposable diapers have been tested. Again, for some of this testing, some of the reports try to distinguish between what's intentionally added. So with the menstrual underwear, where that's like intentionally added to add water as a barrier, there would be higher levels. But there was a question about toilet paper, and it's possible PFAS could show up at lower levels just because they're in so many things that they might just unintentionally show up at lower levels. Yeah, you had your hand.
I did send all the information that I did just participate in the study as well. And I gave everything to my doctor as well. And as you've all mentioned, my doctor didn't know anything about it. But I was a little concerned because I had 3 of my results were like in bold print and they were higher, than and so when asking, I have no idea what that means. And so I'm asking, what significance would it be to have had like 3 bold print elevated levels on our tests?
So the question is for people whose levels came back above average or above the 95th percentile for several chemicals, what does that mean? I'd say that's the answer to that question is part of why we're doing the study. I think the motivation for creating those fact sheets and presenting the information in a way that hopefully over time clinicians will understand and start to use is that at an individual level, it's possible that sort of knowing that as part of your health history, knowing the types of health effects that are linked to higher exposures could help them, could help your doctor sort of keep that in mind in the future. There are certain screenings that are recommended for people with higher levels. At a much higher level, I would say, for people who or in areas with really high levels of PFAS in the water, there have been instances of cases where doctors, sort of knowing about their patient's exposure, are able to more quickly diagnose certain health conditions. I guess the way I think about PFAS blood tests is it's sort of like a cholesterol test. Like if you're high, it's a marker that you might be at greater risk for certain health outcomes, but it's not for sure. And it's really hard at an individual level. We can sort of never know the likelihood of any one disease happening, and if someone has a health condition, there's no way to know for sure if the PFAS played a part in that. But the sort of bigger level, understanding the exact level that might increase your risk, the mixture, that's part of what we're hoping to learn from the study. Any Zoom questions?
Just the only last Zoom question was sort of similar to a question that was asked, but just asking that as more analyses are done, will those be shared out just in community meetings or also shared out like directly to the study participants?
That's a great question. So how do we plan to update the community? And I think we can do both. We can have community meetings when we have sort of more updates to share. And if people are interested, we've thought about putting a newsletter together to provide some periodic updates. We do have a list where we're compiling email addresses, so if you'd like to receive updates in the future, we can share findings as they come along. We'll be publishing peer-reviewed journal articles, but we'll also have more interim levels, and we do want to keep people updated throughout.
You mentioned that there were 14,000 compounds that were considered PFAS, and do you feel that the ones you tested for were representative, or, the fact that these are coming down in the general population may mean that other ones are going up because they replace those?
Such a good question. So I mentioned that there's over 14,000 different, oh yes. So you mentioned that there's over 14,000 different chemicals known to be PFAS, and that number keeps going up. And we're testing for 7, so are they representative? What are we missing? They're not representative of that whole class. The chemicals that accumulate in our blood tend to be the long-chain PFAS. They're the ones where we see decreasing levels in the general population. In their place, there are other PFAS that are being used in products. We don't tend to find them accumulating in our blood in the same way, so when we look for them, we don't really see them there, and industry likes to point to that and say, these aren't a problem, they're not accumulating in our bodies. But they don't have to accumulate in our bodies or show up in our blood necessarily. Like, we still are being exposed to them even if we don't measure them in blood. So I am concerned about exposures to these newer PFAS. We do hope to learn more about other types of PFAS. One of the tests that we will be running on for samples from some of our participants is a test that tells us more about total PFAS. So it'll tell us a little bit more with those 7, are we capturing 10% or 50% or 90%? How big is that pool of PFAS in blood? But PFAS might accumulate in other parts of our bodies as well. And so we know we're being exposed to other PFAS that are more commonly used in products now. And we're in the early stages, really, of understanding how much those exposures are.
It's unfortunate that the representatives didn't stay, but I'm very proud of the fact that AIR has done so much to filter the PFAS out of our systems. And I'm just wondering if there's, my belief is that some of that getting PFAS out of our water supply has been done by taxpayers. We're paying the money for those filters to be in there. Is there any way that now we could apply for some of the, and I don't know if anybody knows that, can we apply for some of that money that's now out there to help a community with PFAS instead of just paying it for the tax, from the taxpayers?
So the question is, AIR has done a fabulous job at putting in place treatment, and taxpayers have paid for that treatment. Is there any way to recover some of that money from the federal funding that's available or other means? And I won't claim that this is my area of expertise. I do think one opportunity might be more with lawsuits, and I know AIR is part of a lawsuit. many other water suppliers are also part of a class action lawsuit against the chemical manufacturers. Ultimately, they're the ones who profited from the chemicals in the first place. But I don't know a lot about what the outcome of that will be. I don't know if once money's been spent, if it's possible to cover the past costs, but for future costs, like there's a big cost to put the treatment in, the capital costs, but then the operations and maintenance costs. There might be opportunities, but I'm gonna hand it to Lori because she might know more.
I'm not sure I know that much more than you do, but I just wanted to clarify that we did get $4.2 million from when Fort Devens paid for the first treatment plant at Grove Pond, and they're paying for several years of the treatment as well, but for the switching of the filters and so on, the function, the maintenance costs. So we are getting some money, but you're right, it is coming from taxpayer dollars. There are all kinds of lawsuits going on against 3M and DuPont, who did cause this problem and knew that it was toxic way back. So I really blame them. And particularly adding PFAS is not needed for so many products. I'm gonna, it's getting late, so we'll take like 2 more questions, and we will be happy to stick around and answer additional questions.
How do you compare to Europe?
I struggle here.
How do we compare to Europe?
How do the levels of PFAS in the U.S. compare to Europe?
Do they have a problem with it? How are they addressing it? How do we compare to them?
That's such a good question. I've read about some communities that have high levels because of environmental contamination. I know there's some biomonitoring studies, so something like NHANES, but in Europe. But that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Australia has some military impacted sites.
Australia is pretty high. Their levels are high. The levels are really high in Maine, where farmers were working with sewage sludge was allowed to be put on farm fields, treated sludge, and it had PFAS in it. And we heard some people speak who were working on an organic farm, their dream job, career, and their levels of PFAS were really high.
Yeah, like 100 to 1,000 times higher than the general population. Okay, maybe one last question?
I just have I work for Mass DEP and the watershed planning program. I just wanted to let people know that we just finished a study on fish.
Do you want to come up and talk to the phone?
So the Zoom people can hear you. I'm not going to be able to repeat the whole thing. And before you come up, I just want to acknowledge Tara Summers and Chris Mugford from ATSTR. So if you have any hard questions about ATSTR, you can ask them. But the ATSTR has been a great partner throughout all the studies, so we're grateful to be a part of this great effort and glad that you both came tonight. And you were in Hyannis last week, so thank you for being both.
Thank you, guys, for holding this. I just wanted to let people know we have just finished two PFAS in surface water studies, and the results.
Like this speaker, so people can see. I'll hold it for you.
Okay. Anyway, so we did find also PFAS in all the ponds we sampled and all the fish we sampled. And the Department of Public Health has used the information in our study to issue advisories in ponds, various ponds across Massachusetts. So you can look at the Department of Public Health's website to see which ponds have advisories, which ponds have the highest levels in the fish. And so cautionary statements about eating certain fish from certain ponds. So I urge you to take a look at that, inform yourself about eating fish from ponds across Massachusetts, and also recreating. I found they were sampling beaches across Massachusetts and found that all of them were below the 90 nanograms per liter number, cautionary number that Department of Public Health has established. So that's good news. It was in all ponds, but it's also below recreational exposure concerns. So I just wanted to let people know that those studies are out there, and those advisories are out there.
And it does include the natural river. Right, we're gonna mention that it includes the natural river.
I think so.
Here is the QR code for the survey. Thank you, Anna. That was really interesting. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. We will be happy to stick around and answer any individual questions that you may have. We really appreciate your support tonight. Please get involved in PACE. We'd love to have you help out.
I will.